coming to the 11 o'clock session. The name of it is Apple's Growing Divide Between Users and Programmers. I'll read the description so that you have a brief idea of what we're going to be talking about. The incredibly open nature of the Apple II for development, down to the inclusion of schematics in every box, encouraged a generation of users who are also programmers. By contrast, today we have the walled garden of iPhone OS, where Apple rules all. Between these polar positions is the Macintosh. How have Apple and Apple users evolved over the years? Has using computers become more or less creative? What trade-offs have we made between accessibility and empowerment? How did the Apple II and its users measure up to modern times? And the reason we're having this panel is because I wanted to have a panel. The format for this session actually came before the topic, because we've had panels before and they always seemed pretty fruitful. And I wasn't sure quite what we could talk about. Then we got an article in the last issue of Juiced.GS from Ivan discussing this exact topic. And I thought maybe we could crack it open a bit more, look at it from some additional perspectives, because this is really hot right now. I work at computerworld.com, and a lot of people are complaining that Apple is being too restrictive about their computer, and I wonder if that's actually true. So these three panelists have agreed to discuss it, both from their own perspective and to engage in each other. The idea here is to walk away enlightened, not enraged.
No, I want enraged.
If you do have questions, if you could please save them for the end, that'd be fantastic. The users, the panelists are especially encouraged to speak to each other, not just me, because I'm here to moderate, not to panelize. And we will start just by, if you can just go down and briefly say, who you are and who or what you're representing. Well, the next question after that will be, what is your experience with these devices? So just for now, who are you and why are you here?
I'm Mike Maginnis. I guess the Apple II stuff that I do is I do a lot of scanning of the stored up documentation. I did the Computist Project. I scanned all those. I'm currently doing the Apple Works forum, magazines, and a few other things that I hope to have up shortly.
I'm Ivan Drucker. I am the owner of IvanExpert. We're a Mac consulting company in Manhattan, and I am a former Apple employee. I was a software quality engineer, and I worked on, the most recognized thing I worked on was the classic environment of Mac OS X. Prior to that, some more obscure applications like Macintosh application environment, and actually I worked on Copeland as well, writing performance scripts for that, which ultimately I think wound up being used on what became Mac OS 8.
I'm Martin Haye. I started as an Apple II Plus programmer. Now I work for the California Digital Library, putting electronic books, electronic articles, all that sort of stuff online, making them searchable, and so on and so forth. I never worked for Apple, and actually I abandoned Apple when they flipped up Apple II users in general, and they did lure me back with Unix, but I'm kind of tentatively maybe okay with them a little bit now.
So why don't we start, Martin, come back this way. What is your experience with Apple's modern devices, the iPhone, the iPod, the iPad, and or its competitors?
Starting with competitors, I had a Palm PC, not a Palm PC, a Palm phone, like Palm 5, and I went through a zillion generations of that, and then I jumped to the iPhone. Pretty much when the iPhone came out, I was blown away by its user interface. I tried to program for the iPhone, and it didn't really fit in my brain, so I have not done any programming for it.
I have been using Apple's products heavily since 1978, and their desktop computing products, that is. And I continue to, of course, in my work. And as far as mobile devices go, I've been a heavy mobile device smartphone user from the beginning. I've had first Trio, and I currently use a BlackBerry. I have never used an iPhone. I play with an iPod Touch sometimes. I think that I think we'll probably get into some of the reasons why, but as I do think that the iPhone's user interface is very simple, but I also find that it's inefficient
smartphones like Ivan, I've been using smartphones for close to a decade now. I started with the old the Palm devices. We moved to the Trio when they migrated Palm OS to the phone, and I currently use Blackberries, and I'll be switching to Android here shortly.
As will I probably.
And why would you be making that switch, either of you?
Because I don't want AT&T.
Oh, you can have BlackBerry on any carrier though.
No, I'm not getting an iPhone.
No, I understand, but why are you switching from a BlackBerry?
I don't like that OS. It's Java based, it's slow, it's buggy. And BlackBerry is, as far as I'm concerned, BlackBerry is sort of in this slow decline. Sort of they're coasting on their corporate contracts and their government contracts. There's no innovation there. There's nothing new.
Just like Palm.
Yep.
Yeah.
And BlackBerry, when it came out in 2003 or so, it was great, and it was new and it was amazing. And 7 years later, I'm still seeing the same thing on the phones. It's got a slightly updated interface, but it's basically the same thing that it has been.
Now, Mike, you had said that you want to like the Apple stuff, but you just can't. What is it that's keeping you from jumping that off?
Well, with the iPad, in particular, it's to me the iPad is a perfect example. It's almost there. You know, it's got a great interface. It's nice and smooth, but it's missing. Yeah, I tend to like to want to play. I like the open architecture that you have with the old Apple II stuff. Obviously, I think most of us do, and that's just not there anymore. You know, there's no. In order to actually get in there and play with the iPad, you have to do a lot more work than I'm willing to do. It's basically become it's Steve Jobs' sandbox, and playing with his rules he won't play. It just doesn't interest me.
Just can't buy that.
How so?
Programming any modern computer is a pain in the ass. And programming the iPhone is one of the easier programming tasks today. Apple provides for free, like they used to with the Apple II, really, really nice tools to build apps for the iPhone.
I absolutely agree that they do. It's just that if they don't like your application, you don't get to put it out there for people to use, unless you want your users to violate, their end user license agreement and jailbreak the device.
Right. But on the other hand, they do all the marketing for you.
No.
They do the storefront, which is pretty nice.
But that is different. What you just said, though, is different than what you initially said, which is that it's too hard to get in there and just do something. So you were talking about, so your concern is not just being able to do something, but being able to do something that other people will see.
I just don't like the feeling that I'm being restricted in what in the way that if I write an application for the iPad, then I feel I should be able to do what I want with that. I don't want to have Mom's approval back in Cupertino before I can get it out there for users to see.
Share.
Yeah, exactly.
Right.
Oh.
And as far as I guess with the first point, I was talking more about the hardware. I'm drawing a blank on it now, but it just feels like the iPad is lacking a lot of a lot of hardware things that I would like to see. It's not 16 by 9, and like I said, I'm drawing a blank on the specific specs right now. But
Well, one thing that's annoying is that you have to be licensed if you want to develop anything for the dock connector and get all the information for that. Sure on that.
Yep.
So, I have similar sympathies as far as the mom factor, because I do like to get in there and hack and just do things. And while I agree with Martin that actually Apple does provide really robust development tools for free, they are the only development tools you are allowed to use, and then you need mom's approval if you want to distribute it. And I think even though it's probably not really that much of a restriction, I can kind of probably do what I want. There's kind of just that feeling that there's a door in the API that says do not enter, you can't enter, or actually it's just the absence of that door in the API. And it's just working within what you know are defined confines, both as a user and as a developer, is, I think, the part of the iOS experience that feels uninviting to me.
Okay, now, what do you think Apple's motivation has been to make it so difficult to get these programs out?
That's clear.
Yeah, I think that's pretty clear. They have a certain level of quality control.
Right, which is nice. You know,
Sure.
now I think Apple's adopted a lot of this stuff in kind of a cynical fashion. I think they're embracing openness to the extent that it makes them money.
Right.
No, that's
But they're embracing an awful lot of openness to the extent that it does make them money. And they're trying to control crapware on the Apple Store, but
Try harder.
they would have to try harder. There's a lot of apps on there, and a lot of them are pretty crappy actually. So you can write a crappy app and get it on the App Store, and you don't have to pay Apple to do so. Or like you have to pay like $200 or something to actually just be able to distribute it.
Yeah.
And when you compare that to the price of an Apple II in modern dollars, which would be about $3,000, compared to the price of...
You don't have to pay anything to distribute an app on the Apple II. Yeah, I mean, you have to
You
invest
don't.
in the hardware,
But if you just add the total cost, it's a fraction of what it used to be.
It's not. You need a Mac to develop the code. What's that going to cost you?
On Craigslist, okay, but
I feel like I don't know. I think it's the feeling that actually I completely just lost my train of thought. So
Well, one question I have is, you say that Apple wants to make money through this
that's
policy.
right. Yes, that was my thought.
I don't even have to finish my question then, go ahead.
Yeah, no, I think that's right. I feel like there's a two-pronged reason as to why Apple is like this. One, I do feel like if the Apple II was wide open, here's everything we know about this machine, do whatever you want with it. And admittedly, that made a very inconsistent user experience. It was, as a developer, you were God. But, as a user, every program had a different interface. And the Mac attempted to sort of contain that as sort of an interim step by, you could still do anything, you were still God as a developer, but you were given very specific guidelines as to this is how you should develop your app so it can be consistent with other apps. And then the iOS actually enforces that. So so in some ways I kind of feel like the iOS allows Apple to have a direct relationship with its users without developers potentially getting in the way. Developers are allowed to play, but the relationship is between Apple and the user, and there's a huge business thing behind that because the iTunes Store, owns the vast majority. The App Store has the vast majority of the mobile apps market, and so they have no incentive to allow other development tools, which might allow you to cross-compile to other platforms, or so I think there is a certain amount. I wouldn't necessarily call it cynicism, but I think it's cynicism in the sense that there's what's good business by locking out others for as long as you can for that company is presented as, it runs in contrast with Apple's presentation as the brand of human computing and openness.
Now, do I recall correctly that, is it fair to say that each of you have programmed the Apple II more than you have the iPhone?
Yes.
yes.
Sure.
So, by Apple making this decision, are they improving the user experience? Are they stifling programmer creativity? Are there trade-offs? Is this a better or worse scenario for them?
Then the Apple II.
Sure.
See, it's like we were talking about yesterday with Mark Simonson, the presenter. Let's face it, the world has moved on from hobbyists to users. I've got this device in my pocket, and I really need to make a phone call. And if it crashes, I'm really pissed. And it does crash because I jailbroke it.
It'll crash anyway sometimes.
Well, maybe so. But most of us are users, we're not hobbyists anymore, and to not recognize that fact would be silly in the industry.
Well, I think the biggest example of that is, well, the easiest one to point out is Apple's change of its corporate name from Apple Computer to Apple Incorporated. It's not a computer company anymore, it's a consumer electronics company. We make products for end users. And we're gonna control that user experience the best that we can, and hopefully the users will reward us being Apple by buying our products, and so far they have.
Do you think they're abandoning the Mac?
I think that's coming. I don't know how many more revisions you're going to get of Mac OS that look like Mac OS.
Well, there was a Rolling Stone article in, I think, 1995 or 6 called "The Fall of Apple," and it was actually a great article. And I was actually working at Apple during those years when it came out. I actually got the end of Spindler, all of Emilio, and the beginning of Jobs Mark II, and and in that article they interviewed Jobs, who was still at Next at that time, and it's funny given the stature he has now, but like at that moment he was really part of computing's past. He was an irrelevant player, and he said, if I was Apple, like Microsoft has won the desktop war, so I would milk the Mac OS for as long as I can and get started on the next big thing. Clearly that seems to be what he's doing, and I understand why he's doing it. It's kind of a bummer if you're a Mac enthusiast, and it's a bummer if you're a developer who wants to be able to do whatever you want. But I mean, I do have to agree with Martin that, consistent and reliable user experiences do make things better for users.
But it's less likely to make users into programmers.
Absolutely. Well, I love what Google has done. Like, I mean, without getting into the pros and cons of Android, I mean, they just last week released this thing, App Inventor, which is programming without code, which I just think is so fantastic. To me, that is the spirit of the Apple II. That means that, someone who, if you look at Objective-C and you've never seen it before, it's like, you are terrified. You don't want to go anywhere near that thing. And, and the fact that they've put something together that, it's in the spirit of the Apple II, it's in the spirit of HyperCard, but it's coming from Google. And whereas Apple couldn't be going in a different direction. And yeah, that's going to lead to some ugly and inconsistent apps, but people can go ahead. Anybody can go ahead and make those ugly apps, and some of them are going to make brilliant apps, and they can distribute them. And I think that's fantastic.
Now, you said that the spirit of the Apple II is the openness, and Apple has transitioned away from that with iOS. But closed systems are not new. I mean, the Apple II.GS and the Super Nintendo, for example, have the same architecture, and yet you could make anything you want with the Apple II.GS, whereas Nintendo had to approve the Super Nintendo. Obviously, they're very different machines with different purposes, but the point is that you can have a closed system that is successful and does support independent development, like the Xbox 360 does today with its Xbox Live Arcade and community arcade games.
Right.
So why is iOS being seen as an aberration and being held to a higher standard than these other machines that are receiving acclaim?
I've actually thought about this at some length, and I think the answer, I kind of think it's some combination of three factors. The first factor is the Apple brand, which is those other platforms have not staked a claim as being the creative platform. And if you are a developer, then developing is your expression of creativity. So that's, I think, one reason, but I think another, so part of it is the Apple brand itself and what it claims to represent. And then I think also it's the nature of a general purpose device versus a specific purpose device. And I would argue that even though they're phones and media players, that iOS is a general computing device. It has a general keyboard. It can do lots of different kinds of things, whereas Xbox and Nintendo, even though you can extend them and do things with them, are specific computing devices. And then, I think really the last factor is that this is kind of a strange thing, but I was thinking about this. There's a proximity factor. The relationship you have with something that you're looking at 6 inches to 2 feet from you is very different somehow than the relationship you have with something, I don't know, 8 feet away, 12 feet away, where you may or may not have a full keyboard or other means of expressive input. And the phone is the most, like the most intimate thing of all, like you're touching the screen. So I think it's some combination of those 3 factors that make iOS feel different to me than consoles.
I feel like we need to give Apple a little bit of credit, and we need to distinguish between walled gardens. Some walled gardens are a lot more walled. My husband just bought, he thought that all smartphones are the same. God only knows why. So he bought this quick fire from AT&T.
What is that?
It's basically a Java ME type thing.
Got it.
And it's awful. And you can only buy apps that AT&T approves.
That's,
And all of their
that
apps
must be
are
awesome.
All of their apps suck. I mean, they're incredibly atrocious. And if you don't like it, you also don't get a refund. But you paid $30 for.
But they've got a great network.
So Apple, Apple has this uneasy marriage with AT&T, and AT&T's corporate culture really got stomped. And the proof of that is that they're still doing their old thing in their own world, and they think it's just great. So I think we need to distinguish between good walled gardens and bad walled gardens. It's a continuum.
I don't know that that was just AT&T, as far as, the buying the apps.
Yeah.
Only. I think that was every phone carrier,
Has their crap
True,
apps.
yes.
Right.
all
Well,
phone
well,
carriers.
I mean, it used to be, and with everybody except AT&T, I think it still is, basically that the hardware maker makes the handset and then gives it to Verizon or whoever, and Verizon
That's what
customizes
they want.
the application.
Well, I
and
believe
you
that's
deal-
how Apple got their exclusive with AT&T.
Yeah.
It was AT&T were the only ones letting Apple
Well, exactly.
make it an Apple phone and not an AT&T
They
phone.
went to Verizon first and said this is what we want to do with our phone, and Verizon
They're like,
said, there's
"Hell
no way
no."
we're going to do that.
Yeah.
So, I don't think AT&T is alone in that particular way of thinking.
I should clarify by saying I see absolutely nothing wrong with the App Store. In fact, I think the App Store is fantastic. Mobile delivery on any other platform is like, I mean, I use Windows mobile devices. I wrote Windows mobile applications for their PDAs, and I wrote a couple of cool ones and big ones, and that was fun and everything. But it's like, holy crap, just even trying to get your app onto one of like Fandango or one of the awful mobile device providers, and then or buying something from there and getting it to your phone. I mean, the App Store just like makes that experience so great. So I have no problem with the App Store. I just wish it weren't the only way that you could get an app to an iPhone. It's like, fine, let Apple have their store and let them be as fascist as they want over there, but please let us.
At least let me stand in a room with somebody else and trade apps.
Right. Exactly.
Hey, I just wrote this great app.
And I love it, and I love that on the Trio, right? Like Beam
Right.
an app.
Exactly.
It's so intimate in a way, and I kind of feel like that strangely, as intimate as Apple tries to make the UI in the iOS, that intimacy is between you and the device, and by extension Apple, as opposed to you and other people.
Now, MIT has a programming language called Scratch, which they developed as an instructional tool. It's supposed to be an introductory programming language that especially middle school and elementary students are exposed to. Somebody who I think is not MIT, a third party, developed a Scratch application for the iPhone, submitted it to Apple, and they rejected it for the same reason that they reject emulators. They're trying to be consistent with their policy. Now, I know someone who's pursuing their PhD in computer science, huge Mac fan. He has a Mac that boots into Mac OS, Linux, or Windows. He has an iPhone and everything. When he heard about this decision to not carry the Scratch application, he sold his iPhone because he said that it is morally reprehensible for Apple to withhold access to educational tools, especially in a platform that is so popular. So does Apple have some sort of responsibility to society? I mean, now that the iPhone has so permeated society and it is almost everywhere, do they need to be more responsible with how accessible it is or what they let people do with it?
I think they do, actually. I also agree that it's harmed by programming an Apple II Basic on an iPhone. No one literally is harmed by that. So I have not been able to figure out any reason, cynical or not, that they're doing that. Their stated reasons are just laughable.
Why?
I'm trying to make a more consistent experience. What? You can make the display on an iPhone do anything.
Right, but they don't want you emulating an Android, you know, or something. They don't want you getting your apps from any other source than the App Store, because that cuts into their business model.
But why eliminate emulators?
Because an emulator might be for a modern platform. Sure, 8-bit emulators are harmless, but not every emulator is 8-bit. So then, I mean,
you might download software from somebody else and run it on your emulator.
Right, that's what they don't want. Now I would agree, and I could even argue that, like, you know, like say someone does do a Commodore or Apple emulator, that kind of thing. They still don't want you downloading apps from someone else because they want you downloading apps from them.
Even Commodore apps?
Even Commodore apps.
Well, then
because if you get your entertainment
then let
from
me download Commodore apps, but they won't let me do that either.
Yeah, but they don't want you to. They want you, let you download Commodore apps from the App Store. Yeah, I understand.
Let me pay 99 cents for Choplifter for the Apple II.
I couldn't agree more, but, you know, it's I think, though, to answer your question, Ken, I don't think Apple actually has a responsibility to society to make, I agree with Martin that you can't use any other development environment than like, forget emulators. The fact that you can't use any other development tools, you have to use Xcode, you have to learn Objective-C, like, just really, like, irks me as a developer. It's like, it runs machine language, whatever, like any computer, whatever you do to make something happen on the iPhone, it seems to me like, you know, and I understand that, again, they don't want cross-compiling so that you can easily deploy on other platforms, so that they can, but, like, you know, it's
There's a cynical.
yeah, there is a cynical business for it. I mean, right now, but do they have a moral responsibility? No. Would I like to see them? Yes. I think it's obnoxious, their policy.
Mike?
Well, I tend to take kind of the opposite, not the opposite, but stance that Apple's, I mean, when it really comes down to it, Apple's a business. They're a hardware company just like the rest of them out there, regardless of Steve Jobs' reality distortion field and some of the pretty stuff that he says on stage. Their only responsibility is to their stockholders. They're in business to make money, and that's what they do. And like Martin, I certainly don't agree with all their decisions on a personal level, but, you know, as far as being responsible to society as a whole or anything like that, no, absolutely not.
I do think as a developer, it's a bummer though. I don't have, right, I can agree with it that they're a business, they're entitled to do what they want to do, and that sucks, but I mean, you can take that to an extreme too. Like, you know, they can start, I mean, they're not going to, but I mean, hypothetically, you could say, oh, well, they're gonna start, you know, selling something that, you know, just as, I can't come up with an example, but I'm just thinking, just to say they're a business, they're only responsible to their stockholders, and therefore nothing they do can be judged, that I disagree with, but I don't, on this particular case, I don't think that they're responsible for making iPhones more accessible to middle school students, etc.
Now, we've talked about how Apple has transitioned their audience from non-obvious to obvious and the like users to programmers or vice versa. But if you look at the demographics of this Apple II convention, there are a lot of iPhone and iPod and iPad users here. So we fall into both demographics. We have bridged that gap. How can Apple do that? How can they make a device that has the best of the Apple II and iOS? What would that device look like?
First, I'd like to ask a question. How many people here have written a Mac app?
In Objective-C specifically?
In any language? That's about what I thought. So the Mac is not a walled garden. You can write in any language you want. You can make emulators. Why is this audience stuffed with programmers, not programming the open machine that Apple makes?
Martin, would you include HyperCard with that?
Would I conclude what?
Would you include HyperCard with that?
I guess, yeah,
Yeah.
sure.
Okay, then.
Alright, so that's a couple more. Fact is, it's just not very fun. It's not fun.
It's like
programming
asking
that.
mom for the keys to the car.
No, it's not that. It's all these menus and all these events, and it's all very confusing. It's a lot of work.
Oh, you're talking about programming the Mac, yeah.
Programming the Mac, and so
It's true. Part of the simplicity, part of the joy of programming the Apple II is it's the fact that it is so small and limited. Like, you can understand the entirety of the Apple II in your brain, whereas it's not even possible to understand the entirety of networking on a Mac, or it's just it's a massive universe.
sorry, what was your question, Ken?
What would a device look like that has the best of both the Apple II and iOS? Is it,
I would certainly like to see, I don't know that the device physically has to change, but I would like to see something that makes it easier to develop. A HyperCard, the Google App Inventor thing.
Right, some kind of visual programming language? would be
Something
awesome.
that makes it, something like AppleScript, something that makes it so you don't have to be deep in the APIs of a slightly cryptic programming language to be able to make your device do new things.
Right, like a macro language would be awesome.
Yeah, absolutely.
and would the product of these new environments still have to be approved by Apple?
Not in my ideal universe, but it's an unrelated issue.
Yeah, why should I have to approve my macro?
Apple would then be giving up their control over the device. They would have to change their goal of creating a consistent user experience, wouldn't they?
That would make a better product.
Yeah, I mean, for Apple to maintain a consistent, it depends upon, I guess, what you consider to be consistent. The Mac offers a pretty consistent user experience. Yeah, there are some deviant apps, but it's pretty consistent. And, whereas the iPhone is fascist in its consistency. It's perfect. It's unyielding. If you're a developer, you can't skin it. You can't, you can't put things in the background. I mean, you can do all this if you jailbreak it, and that's why people do, because people want to use this device that's awesome to do the things that they want to do. So,
But they do it because they're pissed off.
well, there's that too. I agree. The door is closed and they have to open it. No, that's right. But I think that yes, they would be letting go of a little bit of the user experience, and I think that could easily be to the benefit of users.
And Apple.
And Apple. Well, I don't know if it's for Apple, but it certainly would be for users.
Sure. Envision, a classroom with a bunch of students with iPads learning programming.
Yeah.
Wow, Apple benefits just the way they used to benefit by selling a zillion devices.
Absolutely. Yeah, that's the thing. And actually, I've thought about this, one problem I have with the iPad that maybe a lot of people don't have, and the iPhone and all these devices, is I touch type fast. And I feel so limited in my just ability to even input. I know you can Bluetooth keyboard and dock a keyboard on the iPad. That's all good. But I would love there to be some means of expressive input. I don't know what that would be. I'm not, an interface designer, but I'm getting a bit far afield, but I agree with what Martin said. How great would it be if, you've got people, they've got this thing, and they feel like, what can I make this thing do? That's what the Apple II is all about. When I see that blinking square, I'm like, what can I make this thing do?
That really has changed.
Yeah, and the Mac turned down the volume on that a little, and the iOS turns it down all the way, pretty much, I feel like.
Mike?
Well, I think that this is, goes back to the basic philosophy of the two founders of Apple. Woz made this machine that he would want to use and to program and play with, and his intention was never really to sell it or make any money with it. He just wanted a computer that he could use, and Jobs saw this as an opportunity to create a business around it. There's nothing wrong with that, but for jobs, the computer was always an appliance. You know, it's an elegant appliance, and we don't want you to see the magic smoke in the box. And when you start getting down and playing in an open architecture where you have low-level access to the hardware interrupts and things like that, then you're in an area where he doesn't want you sniffing around, because you might do something that, I don't know, maybe that he doesn't think that you should be doing with his devices. This is, to me, this is kind of a part of sort of a bigger trend that's going on in digital media in general, where the content creators, the big companies that create movies, television, whatever, are taking back more control of the content and saying, we're not selling you the content, we're selling you a license to use it in the way we think you should use it. If you don't like it, you can go somewhere else. You know, and there are rumors now that iTunes is going to be moving to the cloud, and it's going to be storing all the music and everything up in the cloud, so you won't actually have this content locally to do with what you want. If Apple decides, for whatever reason, hey, this, you know, or the artist that made the song decides, I don't want people to have access to the song anymore, they can pull that and there's nothing you can do about it. And to me, that's kind of a disturbing trend.
I'm totally with you there.
I agree. Although, getting back to what's good for users, like, that stuff needs to be in the cloud. People use 2, 3, 4 computers and devices regularly, and the whole notion that it's like your iPad or your iPhone is married to your one Mac is just a really outdated idea at this point. I mean,
Yeah, my
and
dad bought
forget
an iPad, and he can't use it because his Mac's too old.
right.
Well, you can't use an iPad without a Mac, or without a PC of some sort. That's stupid.
Yeah, I think that will change, but yes, it is
Yeah, I think it's
stupid.
a 1.0 thing.
Yeah, and also like, and then also the need for the cloud stuff, like with photos, which aren't going to be subject to the same like, I don't like this song kind of thing. But it's just like, you know, it's like people like, you know, we had a client that I've been like trying to figure out a solution for her for, you know, a year or something like that. As she's like, I've got 3 machines, and I just want iPhoto to be the same on all 3 of them, and you can't do it.
I don't have a problem with the idea of the cloud. I think that's a natural progression as we get more and more things.
But you just like the idea of Apple monitoring what's in the cloud, whether or not they think you
it's
should
a
have
matter
it.
of who controls
Right.
the content that's in the cloud. You know, if I paid for this, is it mine? Is it yours?
Right,
Well,
like when Amazon
I tend to think
went
it's
through
mine. I'm not, you know, obviously there are certain restrictions to the law. If I buy a song and I can't just copy it to whomever I want to.
Right, that's true even now. If you buy a CD, I mean, you're ostensibly, you know, the law says you can do certain things.
Right,
with it.
exactly, but I don't want Apple deciding someday that because they don't carry this artist anymore, suddenly I don't get to listen to that song that I paid for.
Right, you just don't want to give one company that much control,
Right.
which I totally agree with.
And if you look at the way Apple has handled the iPad and the iPhone development, they really, really, really want to be in control of that.
And they do pull apps.
Yep.
Oh yeah, they have, and they also, well, and they, you know, they're like, well, we'll never pull an app off your device. We only did that once, but it's like, you know, just the fact that they can makes me feel like it's not my device. I buy the thing and I want it to be mine, you know, and it's not, and it doesn't feel like mine. It feels like Apple's. Maybe that's what it is really about the
Well,
iOS products.
Like you're renting it.
In that particular case,
You're licensing it.
Apple isn't the only one that's done that. Amazon pulled books off the Kindle that people had paid for.
Sure.
Google has pulled an app or two. Now, granted, in Google's case, it was because the app was malware. But the fact that they've shown that they can do that, and you know, if they do that, I'm not in the boardroom making as part of these decisions. You know, so I tend not to trust other people to make these decisions for me.
Well, and to that extent, I kind of agreed with what Sheppy said, which is that even if you don't like the policy, at least if there's a clearly articulated policy that's
Sure.
consistently enforced,
Right.
at least you know the parameters of what you're working with, as opposed to this very opaque nature of what makes an app okay.
Right.
Well, before we get to closing statements, because we're almost out of time, are there any questions for our panelists? Dean?
I have a number of comments or just thoughts about this. I think the environment has changed since 1978. I bought an Apple in 78. Learned BASIC, learned a little bit of Pascal. And then the commercial apps started coming out once AppleWorks was out there. My interest in programming and that sort of thing,
You became a user.
I became a user. I still am. I can still do PR Pound 6 and IN Pound 6 and all that sort of stuff, but it's very fuzzy. I'm a user. I think today I'm a Macintosh user
to do the things that.
that I
Apple-
wanted to do with a computer.
And AppleWorks ended up
Apple
doing those
Works
things.
ended up being a better implementation by far of what I could program. And that's the tool that I used, and that's the way I've gone. So right now, I'm a Macintosh user, definitely not a programmer. I'm an iPod Touch user, definitely not a programmer. Not even interested in a phone. I'm one of the, well, there's one other person here that's not a cell phone user, but I don't even own a cell phone. Don't have a need for one, just in my lifestyle. And people that I associate with, coworkers and friends, most of them do not have the background that I have, so that it's really scary, but I'm their technical consultant, I'm their IvanExpert. And that's pretty scary. And that's the majority.
That's how I
And
got
that's
into
what
it. I was that guy too.
Right. But I have another profession that pays me better. But that's what I see Apple becoming, is the Apple, not computer company, but just Apple Incorporated, selling a piece of hardware that people like to use. I'm amazed at the number of coworkers that, as soon as the iPhone came out,
Yeah,
one
it
person got
is amazing,
and
like,
it went
the success they've
just
had with
through
it.
the whole,
Amazing.
pharmacy staff, which is a large part of my life. And there's one or two Android users, there's one or two BlackBerry users, but everyone, it seems like, has gone over to the iPhone. And what are they using it for?
Like, how do they tape on that thing?
They're using it for very simple things. They're using it for a phone. Fortunately, most of us live in a fairly decent AT&T coverage area, so that's not a problem. But they're using it mainly to buy their little 99 or free apps, and that's what they waste an awful lot of their time on, that and Facebook.
Rob,
I have a question. Most of our conversations here were about software and software delivery. What about the hardware? I mean, I can't upgrade the memory in it. I got no slots. I can't make it
No,
do.
You've got a port you can pay handsomely for to learn the specs on.
Yeah, and I guess that was kind of the
But-
point that I was trying to
That's
make
a good
earlier,
point.
was you just, there's no way to upgrade that thing.
Yeah, it's like the first Macs.
Yeah.
But
I think
mean,
it's an appliance.
it's
Right, you
crazy.
can't
to-
even put an SD card in.
Is it
It's
absolutely
crazy that
no
they're using an
appliance?
SD slot.
Yeah.
Because you can do that without, jeopardizing the reliability or the experience at all.
Yeah.
It's that they want to charge $100 for 16 gig of RAM.
I remember
Well,
when
and they want you to realize you made a mistake with your 16 gig of RAM and then buy a 64.
I remember when I got my BlackBerry, my first BlackBerry, my friend had an 8 gig iPhone or something like that. And I went out and bought a 16 gig SD memory card and stuck it in there and upgraded and doubled the memory for $30. And there's no way he could do that. He'd have to go buy, wait for the next 16 gig iPhone and then pay $400 or however much for that.
Oh, he could crack it open and desolder the RAM.
Yeah, exactly.
I mean, I've got
There's lots
a
of
battery,
space in there, too.
I've got a memory card,
Yeah.
it's the stuff I wanted.
Yeah.
That's why this isn't an iPhone. I want an iPhone.
Yeah, exactly.
But I want an iPhone with the ability to make it my iPhone.
Apple makes some really great stuff. Like I said, I want to like Apple, but there's just a lot of baggage there that I can't really get around.
You're being annoying.
And you can take that $30 and go spend it again and have a different set of memory for that same BlackBerry.
Right, exactly.
Yeah, and you can take a whole snapshot of the BlackBerry and store it on that SD card without trusting whether iTunes is going to sync it right.
Andy, did you have your hand up?
Yeah.
Okay, so it's gonna go Andy, Mark, then Jim, and then closing comments.
I don't hear as much Apple say this about the iPhone, but what about that by controlling it, they're also being able to lock down the security, which, the Windows world is a nightmare with malware and viruses and password stealing. And, that by locking this down, they really can insulate a lot better. Something that, I don't know, maybe could take off over 10 years with malware on these mobile devices.
I
About
certainly
Google.
don't want my dad getting a virus on his iPhone. That'd be really bad.
Yeah, I think that is actually an extremely legitimate point, and one that that I should think about more, quite honestly. But I do think, unfortunately, malware is part of modern computing, and it is something that when you've got a cop on every corner, you can really, it might be not as comfortable and as open, but
Yes,
this
no,
is
I mean,
It's an emulator that's gonna get you.
The BlackBerry, RIM doesn't control who develops their apps or what you do with their apps. There's no malware at all on BlackBerries. That's why the government uses it. I mean, it's considered the most secure mobile platform out there right now and has been for quite some time.
And they put tons of effort into the
Absolutely.
security on that device,
It's
much
just-
more than Apple
It's just
does.
two different approaches to the security. Apple says, we don't wanna have to develop the security software, so we're gonna control it by, this other method.
Well, and it really reflects the corporate culture of those two companies. Just as Apple is sort of trying to get the iPhone into business, their heart and soul is, user products, and it's the same thing with BlackBerry. They're trying to make their devices consumer friendly, but it's always going to feel like, a corporate device.
Absolutely.
Mark?
One thing I also want to say about the iPad, if I wanted to program for it, I mean, anybody can program for the iPad, they have to download, but then if I want to give it to my friends, you have to pay a lot of money for it, which on the Apple II, all you do was spend $5 back in the day on a floppy disk, which was a lot easier to distribute back then, and the cost of entry was a lot lower.
I think it's a little bit different. You didn't have you had bulletin boards, but you didn't have the internet as a mass form of distributing these apps. If you wanted to make commercial applications that were going to make you some serious money that you could, live on, you had to spend a lot of money to build an infrastructure to distribute these disks, to buy advertisements, to get good reviews in
Send out
magazines.
paper catalogs.
Right, instead of just putting this on a web page and doing a little Google SEO.
Absolutely.
Jim?
Can I ask one question about 3 major points? One, is Linux the new open experience that Apple II was? 2, why not allow, I should read my own handwriting. That's it. Why does Apple not allow emulators while supporting boot camp of virtual machines like Parallels and VMware? 3, I don't really agree in general that corporate responsibility to their stockholders overrides all other considerations such as consumer protection, environment, labor, price fixing, bid rigging, monopoly, etc.
Alright, let's start with the Linux question.
Is Linux
The new open experience that Apple II was.
I think arguably yes. It is, and there are a number of Apple people who've gone to Linux, but then they came back to Mac when Mac went Unix,
Yeah.
because it offered a lot of the same kind of thing, and you can still make a Mac do anything you want.
Now-
But yeah, Linux is the spirit of make this thing do something.
Yeah.
It's there's a much steeper learning curve than there is on the Apple II by the nature of it being a more complex operating system. But if they're willing to
But from
scale it.
But from that environment, that Linux culture has come some really real revolutions in programming, like Ruby and Python.
Absolutely.
Which are absolutely the next basic. I
But
mean,
Apple
they
can't
really
make
are
any money
a hell
on
of a lot
those.
easier to program than anything else.
Absolutely.
Sorry.
And that's-
Yeah, I mean, if you could program it, right, like if you do Ruby or Python for iOS, like that would be great.
Yeah, that'd be great.
Mike, aren't you a Unix guy?
A little bit. With the latest revisions of Ubuntu and a couple of these other distros out there, Linux has become very easy for an end user just to stick in and run. You don't have to go through and set up config files and things like you used to do, and recompile the kernel every day or two every time you want to do something different. On the other hand, my experience with Linux has basically been I stick it in there and go, well, this is really nice, but it doesn't really do anything that I don't already have over here, and there's no compelling.
I have that same issue.
Yeah, there's no compelling reason for me to switch and to have to learn all the little stuff over again. And I kind of find that, especially, and this might not go over well in this room, but especially with Windows 7 and the updates that have come, it's taken Microsoft a long time, but they're finally starting to catch up to macOS, and especially OS 10, to the point where when I look at a MacBook Pro or something, it's very pretty, and it doesn't really do anything that much better than what I already have, and it's just not worth the effort to switch over.
Any remarks about why they don't allow emulators while they're supporting boot camp with virtual machines.
Well, they're maintaining two separate standards for Mac and iOS. I mean, the Mac, they've basically said you can do what you want. They can't prohibit emulators on a Mac because they don't have that control, but with iOS they do.
Well, yeah, that's totally cynical. They support boot camp because they wanted to get people moved onto the Intel Macs. That's the only reason.
Yeah.
If they didn't have to do it to make money, they wouldn't have.
Yeah,
And so
that's
the reason they
absolutely
don't on the iPhone is because they can.
VMware and Parallels will allow you to run other operating systems.
Yeah, but they can't stop a developer from writing an emulator on a Mac.
Yeah. I see if they were designing Mac OS X now, you think they would try to stop them?
Maybe.
Maybe. The next thing we see from Apple.
Unless they saw some compelling business reason to allow it, then yes.
The next thing we see may be an iPad
Right, that's a-
laptop with a keyboard
Right.
and a mouse.
Or a touch iMac, you
Or
know,
a touch
whatever.
iPad, something like that.
Oh, if there's proprietary consistency.
Right.
Exactly.
How long has it been since Apple's made a big deal about anything in Mac OS X?
And how long has it been since they really featured prominently Darwin? What
It's
an
all about
interesting
iOS.
for end users other than.
Well, Steve has executed his strategy. He's working on the next big thing. And it's not the Mac.
Not that a front-facing camera, good gesture.
I would, but you joke, but I would love that because you can't type on that damn thing, and to have something that would allow you to actually input expressively would be huge. Exactly. Tony knows how to input expressively.
Well, I said that we would go from Jim to closing comments, and we are running a little bit over. I want to get people to lunch on time. So just going down the line as we started, if you have any closing remarks, Mike?
I don't really have anything, but thanks for letting me ramble and complain at you, but makes you know a lot about a lot of things, so. This is a great forum for it.
Relate to that.
Well, you did it very well. Ivan?
Thanks for hearing all this, and yeah, I think it is a very complex issue, and it's not one that has an easy black or white answer. I mean, I'm sympathetic to users, and I'm sympathetic to developers, and those things do come into conflict, and Apple is the axis because they've been my brand of computing for my whole life.
And Mark?
I think modern times are good because openness just happens to make sense for Apple as a business model. And as long as that's true, I think we're all going to benefit and things will get a little more open. That's my hope.
Well, I think it's safe to say that we're probably not going to be seeing iPad conferences in 20 years.
That's safe.
I don't know they have Newton conference.
This used to be a Newton-friendly conference.
Yeah.
But I'm looking for
Is it
one-
now a Newton hostile one?
Yes.
Thrown out.
But I want to close with something that actually Jason Scott told me. He said that he was talking about closed systems in general, Facebook, Wikipedia, iPad, etc. And he said, people think Facebook is an unstoppable juggernaut and we have to fight because if we don't, it will always be like this. But something better will come along that will import everything worthwhile out of your Facebook account. It's really bad to flip out as if this were life and death. We're doing the same thing with the iPad, all this crapola of closed systems versus open systems, with people rooting for companies like their sports teams. At the same time, there was the Altair and the Atari 800 and the Apple II. We still had the Atari 2600 and the NES, two completely closed systems that work dependently. We lived with it, it was fine, and now they're gone and there are other things. I'm bothered by the number of people who happily defend ease over freedom, but Facebook and their like won't survive more than another 5 years in their current form. You won't recognize them in 5 years, they'll be something completely different. They can't survive as they are. Look at MySpace or Friendster or Orchid. There's a lot of space in the ecosystem. I'm not too worried. We won't even be thinking about the iPad by October. At least in the context of the fury or furor that's causing now.
Yeah.
So. Well, thank you very much for attending.
Sounds like absolutely.